Hello team and welcome to a somewhat earlier ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 21st of December 2023. I'm having to do one earlier today because I've got to shoot up to London area with my son. It's horrific out there, horribly rainy and windy, and he's got a rugby trial near London. So that's going to be fun, but I've got to drive him up there. So my other videos after this one will be a lot later than they normally would, so apologies, but that's life. Right, let's get to where we normally start. Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. How many times have I said that? How many times have you listened to me say that? Right, that is signifies another pretty bad day for the Russians. Over 1,000 personnel lost, 1,080, 14 tanks, 31 APVs, armored personnel vehicles, 20 artillery systems. So some really heavy stats there for MLRS, multiple launch rocket systems. That indicates that the Russians are still on the attack, I would say, in a number of places up and down the front line. And the Ukrainians are still able to get some counter battery, eat that out of the ammunition that they've got, and take out quite a fair bit of equipment. 48 vehicles on fuel tanks and 5 pieces of special equipment. I would suggest that the Ukrainians are still pumping out their drones and getting their drones to exact quite a toll on the Russians there. 48 vehicles and fuel tanks is a massive loss for the Russian logistical capability. Right, I'm going to now look at 2 days worth of Andrew Perpetua. He's the mapper that I refer to a lot. He tots up the losses that he sees on social media on a day-by-day basis, and I've got 2 days worth of what he said because he didn't have his ones out yesterday. So yesterday it was just a slight bit more Russian losses than Ukrainian losses, some comms equipment, some drones there, so I don't usually really count those. A couple of boats, BMPs, APCs, nothing too significant. For the Russians, we've got a couple of howitzers, a number of tanks there, good 6 tanks to add the list, T-80s and T-72s and the T-64 there. Some BMP 1s and 2s, interesting the 1s are on there. Yeah, so nothing to write home about really. Russians losing more than the Ukrainians, I would say. And then today's stats, more so in terms of the Russian to Ukrainian loss ratio. There's about a loss of probably 4 to 1 there, maybe 3.5 to 1, 4 to 1 Russian to Ukrainian losses. The Ukrainians losing a couple of boats again. They seem to lose a number of boats every single day. That's obviously down in the Krinky Dnipro River area. M777, T-64, a few BMP 1s, and 113 APC. So nothing crazily high value lost. The Russians, on the other hand, have lost an S-300 transloader. So that's destroyed. That's going to hurt them in terms of being able to load up their S-300s, which is one of their high-value air defense systems. Command and control centers been damaged by Gimlers. Some artillery, some BM-21 Grad, so multiple launch rocket systems. As far as tanks are concerned, T-72s and T-80s, and then quite a few BMP 2s and 3s and BMDs, so they've lost a number of infantry fighting vehicles and then a number of trucks and civilian vehicles. So that's definitely a heavier day of losses for the Russians than the Ukrainians. Put both those days together and it's looking better for the Ukrainians and Russians, but is that still enough of a ratio disparity, a loss disparity for the Ukrainians, if they are going to prevail in the war, given the amount of equipment the Russians have? I'd say a day like that looks pretty decent. A day like that, the day before, is probably not good enough for the Ukrainians. That's what they're up against. If we move on, Trentelenko here says, this Ukrainian 29-kilometer FPV drone range for a Russian BM-27 Uragan, a multiple launch rocket system kill, sounds like a modified 10-inch FOV racing drone carried by a Baba Yaga that was acting as a radio relay. It helps that the Ukrainians has the higher side of the Dnipro River for radio line of sight reasons. So basically, there's been this talk that the Ukrainians hit the Russians at 30-kilometer range. This is now the longest range FPV hit, but it could well have been an FPV drone carried on a Baba Yaga, which are these sort of octocopter larger drones, carries a smaller drone out to a place and then drops the smaller drone. The drone goes off and it relays its signal through the Baba Yaga, through the octocopter, back to the operators. So you're boosting it, but it acts as kind of like your internet booster you might have at home. It acts as a signal booster so that they can operate the FPV drone, and that allows a much greater range, obviously. This is great. It shows that the Ukrainians can hit targets that are a lot further behind the front line than previously. And as Tarantulenko says, there's another battlefield demonstration that artillery is far more vulnerable to drones than drones are vulnerable to artillery. This is downstream from the physical reality that drones fly too low for artillery counter-battery radars to detect them. FPV drones' ability to avoid Russian counter-battery radar detection is why you see headlines like this in Newsweek from Mikhailo Fedorov. He is Minister of Digital Transformation. So Ukraine's cheap FPV drones are more efficient than prized artillery. It was a Newsweek piece. Seeing Fedorov quoted in Newsweek saying, quote, "They work sometimes even more efficiently than artillery," he told Newsweek. So FPV drones are indeed a tech revolution, even though the tech itself is quite easy, but it turned out to be very efficient. This is, good news for the Ukrainians. They are having some good effect with their drones. And then when they announced yesterday that last month they made 50,000 drones, and next year they're looking at making 1 million drones. That's manufacturing, not getting their hands on from abroad. That's manufacturing 1 million drones. And it becomes slightly more hopeful for the Ukrainians. Here is that report, the original report. FPV drone targeted a Russian Hurricane 30 kilometers from the front lines. BMP-27 Hurricane. Let's just have a look at that. There are these different multiple launch rocket systems that we don't see too often. So this is a self-propelled multiple rocket launcher from the 1970s originally, but it's not the new variant. I don't think you've got the Uragan U. There's one that is basically the equivalent of the HIMARS. It's not that one, but and that can apparently fire further than the HIMARS as well. But I don't think that was one that's it. Right, going on. Russia, China, and North Korea have new dynamics, and it's bad for Ukraine. So this is the report that's just come out. We already knew this had happened. OSINT had released data on this, open source intelligence, and I'd then reported that from those OSINT sources. I don't know, probably a month ago now, maybe more, or about the North Korean ammunition that was being transported from North Korea to Russia, and they had received an awful lot of containers, presumably full of ammunition. Well, the White House has now announced, that's not now, that's October the 13th. No, that's December the 21st. So the White House announced on October the 13th that North Korea had delivered more than 1,000 containers. That's what I released before. Washington published pictures tracking a set of containers as it traveled from Nigeria and North Korea to Donetsk, Russia, by a Russian-flagged vessel. The supplies were reportedly moved by rail to an ammunition depot in southwestern Russia near Tikhoretsk, roughly 200 kilometers from Ukraine's state border. Quote, "We condemn North Korea for providing the Russians with military equipment," US National Security spokesman John Kirby had said. The weapons would be used for attack of Ukrainian cities and kill Ukrainian civilians and further Russia's illegitimate war. Okay, so it wasn't unexpected. It's kind of what was thought to be taking place or due to take place. So the question, I guess, is that still going to continue? And I don't know the answer to that. Will North Korea, do they have enough stockpile of ammunition and equipment to pump into Russia? And this article sort of looks at this other idea that two's company, three's a crowd. So Russia, China, and North Korea, they have new dynamics, but actually, if Russia muscles in on China really in terms of its relationship with North Korea, then that might not be cool. China might not like that, and then that could translate into votes in the UN Security Council that might not be in favor of Russia, even though Russia can veto, etc., etc. So, interesting article, and I just wanted to remind people of this because yesterday I mentioned that. I mean, there was talk about the North Korean ammunition not being great and blowing barrels and whatnot, and I referenced a video. This is a video I talked about, which is North Korean ammo and Russian army, a match made in comedy heaven, says Jay in Kiev. But here we have this this guy holding a shard of the barrel that has been blown apart, and doesn't look too happy with that, does he? But yeah, so that is the shard of the barrel, and this is from whence it came. Oh, the video's having a real issue here. But as you can see, it's blown apart, and he's holding that shard. So yeah, North Korea are helping Russia, but it's one for another day, I guess, looking at the geopolitical implications of Russia sort of stepping on China's toes in the sense of if they are going to give weaponry to North Korea, and that is something that China have traditionally done, and they've had this dependency relationship whereby North Korea is completely dependent on China. If Russia's sort of muscling on that, China might not like that, etc. Okay, moving on to distant strikes, standoff munitions and whatnot. There was another wave of Shahed attacks last night, and quite a lot of them, 35 in a number of different districts across Ukraine. However, 34 of them were shot down. Now, this is good news for Ukraine. It shows that obviously their interception rates can be exceptionally effective. It's also, these Shaheeds were shot at a number of different, flying into a number of different places. And previously, when we've seen statistics like this, you think, right, Kiev has probably been targeted mostly here because the interception rate is so good that they're probably firing it at the areas of the best coverage. But actually, if they were flying all around Ukraine and this many were shot down, 34 out of 35, then that's, I mean, fingers crossed, that is good news for the Ukrainians that they're able to have those kind of interception rates further across Ukraine, where we're starting to see, air defense systems being set up. We're starting to see sensors being set up in a number of different places. We've talked about there possibly being a Patriot system down near Odessa, probably one near Starokonstantinov with the airbase there. There's at least one around Kiev, possibly two. I mean, there are different rumors about how many Patriots are in Ukraine, but with each passing week, hopefully interception rates will be higher than they were sort of 6 months ago. Okay, overnight, Russian missiles targeted residential buildings and a tram station in Kharkiv. Now, this isn't last night, this is the night before. But I showed you pictures the night before of a bus station, basically, with lots of craters around it. And I was saying, look, they're just hitting civilian infrastructure. It is not cool. Well, here we've got, a tram station being hit in Kharkiv as well. These pictures just came out later than the ones that I was able to show yesterday. Just again indicates that Russia's attacks on many of the cities are targeting civilian infrastructure, or they're just indiscriminate. I mean, either way, it doesn't look good for Russia. On the other hand, Ukraine appeared to be much more concerned with hitting military targets in the occupied territories of Russia and even within Russia itself, much more frequently than Russia, who are happy enough to hit civilian targets more often. The explosions were reported in occupied Mariupol, heard in different areas. Locals report the work of air defense, and explosions were heard in Krasnodar again, and Russia announces it shot down drones in Belgorod and Bryansk overnight, claiming no casualties, but there are these sorties into Russian occupied territory and Russia itself. That is continuing, and now we're going to move on to other bits and pieces. Here, the Washington Post has removed the tab dedicated to war in Ukraine from its front page. Now, this is an indication that the news is just less relevant for people. And I don't think this is a reflection of the Washington Post trying to say we don't think the news is important. This will be a reflection of clicks, and they will know that of all those tabs at the top of their website, if the war in Ukraine is not getting as many clicks as it did do, and if there's something else that if there is a topic that does get more clicks, whether it be Israel or something else, then they're going to put that up there. There is this coextensive relationship between news media sources and their audience, whereby on the one hand they're driving the news, on the other hand they're reflecting people's interests as well. And here, unfortunately, looks like they are reflecting people's interests rather than driving the point that it's not that they think war in Ukraine is less important now than it was before, although they might also think that. But anyway, it is a challenging sign for those of us who want the Ukraine war to be in people's public consciousnesses much more, because if it's not up there, people aren't thinking about it, they don't worry about it, they're not pressing their politicians to continue to support Ukraine. Ukraine will suffer as a consequence. So this is a real shame. Airlines in Ukraine will most likely be open next year, Alexei Danilov said at the on air on a telethon. I talked yesterday about Boryspil Airport having a Boeing, what was it, a 777-300 takeoff. It had no passengers or cargo. It was just testing all the infrastructure and whatnot. That's really good news. If Kiev can open its airport, that would be fantastic. He noted there are 4 key components that need to be addressed. First is the protection of these airports, those airports where it will be decided to start using airplanes. Second, the infrastructure must be ready. An insurance mechanism must be involved, because without insurance, no one will do it. And the company that will undertake to make flights is also a question. So who's going to want to fly these airports, and will they be able to get insurance for that? Zelensky has emphasized that the effective use of drones is a state priority. Quote, a separate conversation about drones is what is in warehouses and what is needed on the front lines. Logistics will be faster. We're also working on making the use of drones, in particular FPV, more efficient in all directions. And this is on the back of them supposedly being able to manufacture 1 million drones in a year next year. That's a prediction. And as I said earlier, 50,000 last month. On the back of this, there's all sorts of talk about drones. Drones, as we've heard just earlier, are becoming more efficient, arguably, than artillery. And in that context, this is something that Ukraine can really affect. They can produce drones in a way that they can't produce artillery ammunition. And so if they are becoming more efficient and more useful, and Ukraine can produce more of them, then this looks good for Ukraine, considering the difficulties they have with procuring and manufacturing artillery ammunition. Ukrainian hackers, probably in cooperation with the SBU, hacked and destroyed the infrastructure of Rozvodokanal, a major Russian water supply and wastewater disposal company. They encrypted 6,000 computers and deleted 50 terabytes of data, backups, and services. This is obviously going to hurt the Russians. It's been a spate of these sorts of attacks going both ways, with Kyivstar being hit twice, I think, now, and the Russians having their own systems hit. We had the pensions system being fundamentally disrupted. And here we have water supply and wastewater disposal getting hit as well by hacking. So, yeah, lots of activity in cyberspace. Yesterday, the UK update mentioned Ukraine's reinforcement with defensive positions. Now we have photos of some of the ongoing work near the front line. These look like pretty decent, as you can see, tunnels and defenses built quite far underground, so that will protect against the larger bombs, probably thinking in terms of FAB 500s and whatnot. So that's really good news. What have I done? End up printing it. what happens when I try and do things too early. And so, yeah, we've got some concrete boxes there. These are really well built defenses. Of course, you might well be justified in asking why they didn't do these kind of defenses earlier. I mean, they've had 2 years, and there are some criticisms about how long it's taken them to start building these more meaningful defenses. But I guess, like I've said previously, if you are planning on a counteroffensive that is going to succeed, then you're not going to build your defenses where you're at the moment, because you're going to take your land back. And so you'll be 90, 100 kilometers further on. Why bother having really well-built defenses 100 kilometers back when they're not going to be used? It's only when you realize that your counteroffensive isn't going to succeed in that way, and that we are going to have a stalemate along the front lines until something changes. That's when you start thinking, okay, now we definitely need to build. And so I think that's why you're seeing these being built so late in the day. Russia readies a major offensive in Avdiivka as winter frost sets in, the White House warns. So John Kirby has warned of an imminent danger, urging swift approval of the US cross-funding for Ukraine's defense. So he did quite a lot of speaking yesterday at some press conference, I believe, and we'll dip into that in the next video. But just to warn that, Avdiivka could well be under even more pressure. It has seen some fierce fighting. It has seen some huge losses for the Russians, but that doesn't often deter them, does it? And they will go get rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. Anyway, thanks for watching. As I say, early one than normal, and I don't know when the next ones will be out. I may get a chance to do my second video right now because I'm that early on it today. Apologies that my brain is pretty much screwed. Hey ho. Take care. Speak soon.